I'm Ingrid Fisher. I'm a disabled development professional, and I've been on boards before. And there's one issue that I want to talk to you about that has to do a lot with what I think will be indicative of the quality of your time while you're on the board, and a lot about how you view your leadership position and how they might be viewing your leadership position. I want to start out by saying that I am a white middle-aged woman who is sitting against a white wall with some photos, and I'm wearing a beige sweater. Okay, so let me dig in. I want to tell you what happened to me about 25 years ago when I was recruited for the first time to be on a disability services organization's board. It's a pretty well-known one, and I have a lot of respect for what they do. And a woman I knew who was a disabled activist, who was much older, told me that they really needed someone like me because I was younger, I was an activist, and they didn't have a lot of people like that at the moment on the board. So she said, basically, go in there and you know, do what you think is the right thing to do, even though they may not be doing it. And I thought, okay, if that's my mission, I'll give it a shot. Why not? I worked in grassroots women's healthcare at the time, and I felt like I understood sort of the role. So they were very kind when I reached out. They invited me to come to a day-long event for the board members that was around planning. And I thought, cool, great way to get to know each other. And when I first got there to the place where they were holding the retreat, my first impression of the organization was that I was being invited as a potential board member to a space that was not physically accessible. And I was told to go around to the back of the building with someone, and they would take me up in the freight elevator. So the second impression was that their facilitator informed everyone at the table at the beginning that if we needed to use the accessible restroom, what we needed to do was stop the meeting, raise our hand, and ask for the escort, because we would need to be taken in the freight elevator. These were not creating positive impressions for me. And I started to feel like if I was on this board, I was going to be having to do some very, very basic work. And I wasn't quite sure at that point who I'd be doing it with. The staff, I had no doubts about. They were great, but they're staff, and there are things they really are not in a position to push for among the board. And what I realized was that this board, like all boards, had a pretty entrenched culture of its own. And unfortunately, it didn't seem to include an ongoing culture of access in its own activities, which I will, to this day, continue to be somewhat shocked by. Although I realize in retrospect, maybe I shouldn't have been. And one thing that came out as being quite apparent was that many of these folks had worked together for a really, really long time. And I think sometimes when that's part of the culture, it kind of adds to a bit of insider outside energy that is not always great, especially for the new person like I was. So near the end of the day, one thing that just kind of tipped me over the edge was that it became apparent that the fundraiser that was coming up pretty quick for them was going to be held in an inaccessible location, in that if you were a person who attended who wanted to use a bathroom, you would have to wait until you left the event because they didn't have one. And this was the place that they had chosen. So I left that retreat incredibly unsettled, feeling a tremendous sense of responsibility, even though I was not even yet officially on the board, and also feeling a complete sense of, where do I even start? And I was worried because these things that they were talking about, like the fundraising event, were clearly going to damage their reputation. And I felt like that would just be, such a waste. And I understood why someone like me had been, called upon to maybe try to help. And that's what I did. And I realize now in retrospect, I may well have not done that, completely the right way. But at the time, I didn't have a rule book. So that weekend, I reached out to someone I knew who was a very well-known and well-respected trainer on just these sorts of organizational issues in disability. And I was very warmly treated by them. They were incredibly kind. And they told me that I was not off base, and which I knew, but I needed to hear. And that they kind of agreed with my assessment that no matter what else this organization was doing on the board needed to first go through some pretty basic training in disability culture, among other things. So that was good. And I actually was like, wow, I guess I do have something to offer this board. This is great. So then I let the leadership of the organization know on Monday what my impressions had been and what I was proposing. And the reaction to this, probably should have seen coming, but I didn't. They were really upset with me. They were upset with me because they said that I had behaved really inappropriately by airing the organization's dirty linen outside the organization without even telling them. Well, that was kind of a moment for me to think, well, what did you expect? I mean, you invite an activist and then I'm activisting and you're upset. And I understand that, I could definitely gotten the feedback like, we'd prefer that you not do this. Like, I get that. But there was an urgency to the problem that I saw. And their first reaction was to argue with me about the first step I suggested. So we had, I have to say, quite a few conversations over the next week. And they even asked me to come in and have a conversation with another member of the board who was disabled, who did not have my concerns. And I think that's where the insider outside culture comes into play a little bit, because I think their long-term strong personal relationships with their fellow board members who are not disabled really allowed them to feel a degree of comfort and acceptance with the way things were being done, that I, who was, brand new, had none of that sense of loyalty or whatever, was like, I'm not having any of this. So upshot was that I was not asked to join the board. And I was hugely relieved because, as I said, I felt responsibility to do what needed to be done here. And I wasn't sure I could do it, but I did feel like it was important and I could try. The thing was, I did not really feel equal, to the task, because I doubted myself. I was new, I was young. I was upset about things that obviously were not upsetting these people at all. So it made me wonder if I was, just making too much out of something, and knowing that I wasn't. And in terms of the culture of the board, I think what I saw was that even though you would not have expected it with this group, I was in a position of being the token. And that is never a situation I want you to be in on a board. Being on a board is a lot of responsibility, and it's a lot of opportunity. And it should not be something where you feel like you're being used, however unintentionally, to make changes that they're just not ready to make. I mean, they want to feel like they are, and that's why you're there. But when it actually comes to putting change into practice, with fundraising, there's always going to be a reason why what you're telling them is not what they're going to do. And that's a lousy feeling to have if you take your job seriously, like I bet you do. When you're the member of a marginalized community and you make it into these rooms and you're finally at the table, it's like you don't want that to go to waste. There's people counting on you, and it's, you can't do everything, but you want to give it everything you got. But the thing around fundraising is that, how you raise your money is going to tell people how you feel about the cause that you're funding. And in this case, you're telling them that disability inclusion and everything is absolutely essential, but they're not doing it in a way that it is inclusive or accessible. It doesn't make any sense. They're undercutting their own fundraising. And I was there as a person, as a resource, who could tell them that. But the culture of the organization, however befuddlingly, did not yet have a culture of access. And that's, in my case, what I was actually taking on as a new board member. Now, I think, of course, not every organization is going to do this. You may well find yourself on a board where you have found your people and it's lovely. And you are truly doing wonderful things as the member of a team. And even if you are in the minority, you could still have that sense that you're not alone. But if you do, I want to encourage you to push yourself and them as far as you can as a leader, and also know when it's time to walk away, because a leader doesn't necessarily lead by trying to do things that are simply never going to happen at that moment. You have a right to conserve your energy, save your strength for another situation where your gifts will be truly desired, truly welcomed, and truly used. And that's what's going to keep you doing the board work for a long time. I have to say that, unfortunately, my early experience like this kind of killed any appetite I had for board service for an extremely long time. I felt a lot of emotion going through this, a lot of stress. And for a person who's conscientious, the negative stuff isn't what you should be feeling. So anyway, that's my spiel. That's why I'm talking about leadership in fundraising as an essential component of board service. And I wish you all the best in finding your people and your board.